Rune once again picked me out to do that. And I was not the host of those games. Chris Schenkel was the host of the games of our nightly 3-hour show. But suddenly one morning, again, it was my one day off during the games. Margaret and I were going to go up in the mountains and get lunch someplace in the Alps. But at a very early hour, the phone rang, and Jeff Mason, who was Rune's right-hand man at those games, said, terrorists have invaded the Israeli team headquarters, Jim. They've killed one man already. They're threatening to kill one every hour. Rune wants you to stand by. We'll be going on the air. He wants you to host the show. So he said, I'll call you back. So I did what I've been doing. I went down to the pool in the hotel and took a sauna and had a swim. I've been doing that every morning. And again, a phone call. He said, Jim, get on your horse and get out of here. We're going on the air in 45 minutes. Gives you a pretty good idea of how much you could concentrate on something to the exclusion of everything else. That it wasn't until I came back to my hotel room almost a day later at 4 o'clock in the morning and got undressed that I realized I still had a damp bathing suit on, under my regular clothes. But when I got out there, things were already well underway. Jeff Mason, I think, and Marvin Bader, who was our vice president in charge of Olympic organizing, they'd been out there early, and they got the technicians to push one camera out of the studio and up on a little knoll there. They could see down to 31 Connolly Strasse where the hostages were being held. That was the only camera for 16 hours. That was the only camera we had. There was another one on a tower, and we could take that shot, but only when the Munich police said we could take it. They were controlling it. They were afraid, that somehow it would get on German television, and that the terrorists could see it in the headquarters, to see what was going on. But we had the one camera, 16 hours of live television, and I remember during the first hour, it occurred to me that there was a young guy in there named David Berger from Shaker Heights, Ohio, the son of a doctor out there. And he was an American, but he had emigrated to Israel and was a member of the Israeli team. He was a weightlifter. And I thought, I know his name was on the list. He's in that room. And I thought, I'm going to be the guy to tell that family in Shaker Heights, Ohio, whether their son and brother is alive or dead. And that was on my mind all day long, I remember. And of course, eventually I had to tell them the worst possible news because they were all killed at the airport that night. And being a newspaper reporter, and then going into sports, I thought that if you're a guy who reads all the sections of the newspaper, not just the sports section, reporting is reporting. It's basically the same thing, telling the facts of what have happened here and is happening here, and also giving something of the flavor of what it feels like to be here at this point. So the reporting aspect didn't bother me. The idea of telling these people that all these men were dead, of course it did. It was one of the most terrible moments of my life, and I think everybody who has seen it. I've been amazed since I wrote my book, it came out last May, how many people, when I'm at autograph signing sessions, say, I'll never forget the Munich tragedy. And I'll look at the guy and I'll say, well, how old were you? And so many of them said 8 years old, 10 years old. One guy said 7 years. I said, you don't remember? He said, yes, I do. I remember this guy in the mask, or I knew something terrible was happening. And kids and adults alike, they remember it to this day more vividly than so many other moments in our history. Maybe part of the reason was that we weren't used to terrorism at that time. This was something that just came out of the blue. Also, the fact that it was at the scene of the holy of holies of sport, the Olympic Games, and the Olympic Village itself. But it did make that impact. I'll guarantee you, 4 or 5 times a month, at least, somebody comes up to me in an airport or a supermarket or wherever I may be, and I think that when I talk about last week's show and they say, I'll never forget Munich and tell me about this and that. We really played it minute by minute. What we had was I was in the studio, Rune was producing in the control room, and inside the Olympic Village, we had Peter Jennings, who was then the Middle Eastern correspondent for ABC News. He had been, as a very young guy, he was the host of the news. Many people forget that or didn't know it. But then he was a Middle East correspondent, good many years before he came back and became the host again of World News Tonight. But he had come to Munich at the suggestion of Roon. Roon called him up in the Middle East and said, Peter, how would you like a little vacation from the tension of the Middle East? Come to Munich and work with us and do the sidebar news type stories around town. He said, I thought that'd be great. And the next thing you know, Peter was in the headquarters of the Italian Olympic team, no more than about 75 yards from the apartments where the Israelis were being held. And all he had was a telephone. And one of our technicians, Billy Blumel, figured out a way to pipe the telephone into our outgoing signal and thereby, out to everywhere in the United States. At the same time, we had one of our young producers who sneaked into the village wearing an athlete's uniform, an American athlete's uniform that he had borrowed from somebody, and he had an athlete's bag, a boxer's bag, and in that he actually had a 16mm camera. He was going to get film coverage that we could use in another way later on, So he said, I knew this one building was exactly facing the building where they were held. I had a little map of the village. So he said, I went in there and I got in the elevator and I pushed 2. Later I said, why'd you push 2? He said, I don't know. I had to push something. And he said, I pushed 2. I guess maybe I thought I'd get a view. And I got off on 2, started walking down past all these rooms, and I heard water running in a room. And I thought maybe somebody's in there. And I went in. Nobody was. Somebody had left the water running, and I turned it off. So I walked on this little balcony, and straight across, I was looking into the eyes of this guy with the white hat. They look out for the terrorists. And he said, we looked at each other, and literally, I think, blinked, as you read in the novels, and we both quickly went back inside. Well, he was there most of the day, as Peter Jennings was. All he had was a walkie-talkie, and we couldn't figure out how to put that on the air. So he would talk back and forth to Peter Jennings, and Jennings would hold the phone up to the walkie-talkie, and it would throw the phone then back to the headquarters and out over the air. Except that John didn't know this. And at one point, when we were in the commercial, Peter said, hey, he said, you were calling them Arabs. He said, don't call them Arabs. They don't like that. They're Arabs. He says, you're on the air. He said, I am? He said, thanks a lot for telling me, Peter. That's the way that the thing was constructed. Howard Cosell was with the film crew. He was down in the village elsewhere with the film crew, and they got some good interviews and that sort of thing. But that was the basic coverage all that long day. And there was deadline after deadline when they started going to kill people, and they didn't. And then there were scenes to describe, like when all the policemen in athletes' uniforms started scrambling along the rooftops with their guns and this sort of thing, and they were going to try to sneak in here. And it was always something to describe, and a reaction from around the world. And then at one point in the night, they flew them off to the airport, to a military airport, by helicopters. I remember our daughter Mary was standing at the fence. From our studio to the fence of the village was 25 yards. I paced it off the next year when I came back. And from the fence to the headquarters where they were being held was another 75 yards. So a great crowd, a couple thousand people had gathered here at this fence. And looking back, it was not without danger, but our daughter's never been afraid of danger, so she was in that crowd, and she told me later, she said, Dad, when the helicopters went over with the little red lights blinking on and off, they were so close, you almost felt you could touch them. And nobody could do anything, nobody in the world. And that was a touching moment. Minister of the Interior got up there, and instead of saying what had happened at the airport, he started way back at the beginning, that early morning before, and hour by hour. Everybody knew these things, and reporters started shouting, what happened to the hostages? What happened at the airport? And he just kept going. And Marvin said, this guy, Otto Kench was his name. He said, Otto, you got to tell me. They were eyeball to eyeball. He said, Marvin, I can't. He said, you got to tell me as a friend. He said, Marvin, they're all dead. And Marvin said, who? He said, the hostages. And of course, then he told Roon by his walkie-talkie. And Roon told me in my ear. And that was a moment when I had to turn to the camera and say they're all gone. So it was some day, but as maybe you can notice, it kind of tears me up a little bit even now.
Well, I would think over the course of that day, as I recall some of it, you would share with the viewing audience who these athletes were, who the hostages were, and
Oh, yeah.
you get to know their biographies. And
We had a couple who had escaped from the room who were on live with us and that sort of thing.
by the end of the day, did you feel a strong sense of connection with those athletes?
Yeah, well,
Because
particularly with this
Right.
guy from the United States, David Berger, because we had him on. I think we'd interviewed him, and we were familiar with him before then. But some of them had been in the Holocaust. Some of them come from Russia. They came from all over the world, of course, as the state of Israel was formed. We had one man into the studio named Tuvia Sokolsky, I remember. And I said, well, your colleagues are still being held, but what do you think? If you were in the room right now and you could make the decision, what would you do? Would you give in or what? And he said, I have always said that we will never give in to these people who will only fight us when they have guns and we do not. But all I feel in my heart right now is I want my comrades to live. And that was the way everybody felt. But in the end, I think the Germans did the right thing. They tried to do the right thing. Terrorist control was not a science at that point as it is today. It was pretty much brand new. And they had sent snipers to the airport. They were all in place and ready to go. And when the helicopter came and landed, the idea was that they would let two of the terrorists go to the 727 airplane they had ordered up, to take them someplace, an undisclosed designation. To let two of them go over to make sure this airplane was not a trap or something like that. And then on the way back, they would shoot them. And on the way back, they did shoot him, and one of them they got, the other one they didn't. He threw a hand grenade into the helicopter. That's when all the guys were killed. What I said, when I was a kid, my father always told me that our greatest hopes and our worst fears are seldom realized. Tonight, our worst fears have been realized. I said 2 were killed, and I think I said this morning, and then I said yesterday morning, in their rooms. The others were killed at the airport tonight. They're all gone. That was it. Well, I remember somebody said, I don't know who it was, we were all distracted at that time, and I had just, shortly before I got the news, I'd just gone through the whole 24-hour period or 16-hour period that had occurred. And somebody then said, well, Jim, how about wrapping up the whole thing for us? And I thought, that's what I just said, but I did it again. But we were all just so down, we didn't know where we were. And stayed on the air until Rune said, let's wrap it up. And then went back to the hotel room. There had been this false report, which we did not put on the air, but which German television did, that all the hostages had been saved and all the terrorists killed. And so most people in Munich thought that was the case. Got back to the room, Margaret was asleep, it's 4 o'clock in the morning, and she said, oh, you're back, thank God. And she said, well, at least they were all saved. I said, no, you're all dead. That was another moment. And I got 2 hours sleep because we had to go back because they were going to have a memorial service at the stadium. It was supposed to be the first day of the decathlon competition. Instead, it was going to be a memorial service. And as I was going through our ABC headquarters, I saw our mailboxes over there. We each had one. There was a little yellow slip coming out of mine. And that's when somehow the impact of how this had registered back home came to me. It said, Jim, you were a credit to your network, to your medium, and to yourself, and was signed Walter Cronkite. Whoops, how about that?